Hello, everyone. Welcome to another fantastic Hacking HR event. I'm so glad to have everyone here. We're going to be talking about a great topic today, and please be sure to participate yourselves while you're here. This is just as much your event as it is all of the panelists that are going to be on it today. We get so many great insights from you coming through in the chat. So please put your questions, your aha moments, the different things that you have learned in there so that we can all learn and grow from that as well. My name is Renee Eaton. I have the lucky privilege of being the moderator for today's event. So let's get things started. And Jessa, if you could please bring our panelists onto the stage and we'll get things moving. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. It's so great to see you all here and so happy that I get to be part of this. I just love talking about this topic. The topic that we're going to be talking about today is developing empathy, how cultivating highly empathetic leaders impact culture, people, and business. That's a mouthful, but I got it all out with not very many stumbles there. I'm just really excited about this one. Hacking HR has all of their events are fantastic. But I really love this opportunity to be able to talk about empathy because it's one of those things that I think often gets kind of pushed to the side. Talk about, maybe the ugly redheaded stepchild of the business world when we get into the empathy and the emotional side of things. So it's really fantastic that we get to spend the next hour talking about this. So just so that we have an opportunity to know about everybody that is joining us today, if we can do a little intro round starting off, and we'll go counterclockwise. And then when we go on from there, we'll just have a whole free-for-all and we'll let the conversation grow from that point. So my first question will be just who you are and why you wanted to participate in this panel today. So what was the draw for you that made you want to say yes to talking about empathy in the workplace today? So Lindsay, if you don't mind kicking us off here.
Yeah, I'd love to. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Kohler. I'm the lead behavioral scientist at employee engagement consultancy, Scarlett Abbott. And the reason I'm here today is a lot of, our behaviors at work are really driven by emotion. And when we can better understand how we're feeling, how someone else is feeling, we're going to be in a much stronger position to help kind of change those behaviors for better. And I think empathy is one of those first big steps in understanding emotion. So that's why I said yes today. Happy to be here. And back to you, Renee.
Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks so much. All right, you are up next.
Hello, thank you, Renee. It's great being here. I'm Ora Hewitt, and I support people and culture here at La Valley Brensinger Architects. The reason why I wanted to participate in this panel is because empathy is such an important component of leadership, as well as everything that happened within the business, and how can we have not only that conversations, but also how can we create a structure around this. So I super curious to learn from each of you and connect with all the panelists here, and of course with you, Renee, and learn with each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Aura. Erica, you want to kick us off next?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Erica Roberts with Looklist, and I currently serve as the director of all things people. The reason I'm here today is the reason I joined HR, the ability to connect and to have that connection as a leader with your team. Empathy plays a huge role in that. And so very excited to be able to share my experiences to help others.
I love that, Erica. And last but not least, Dwayne.
Hello. Hi, yes, I'm Dwayne Smith. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for a large national company here in Canada, and I'm based out of Toronto. I'm also an inclusive leader, advocate, and an anti-racism educator. And what I've discovered in everything that I've done and continue to do, that empathy is at the root of having the ability to lead not just people, but to lead organizations. So I'm really excited to be a part of this because I think developing empathy is such a huge cornerstone for people, whether you're a leader with the title or without.
Yeah, I love that. And I like already that we're touching on the conversation that we're going to be getting into, and why do we need empathy in the workplace, and what is important, why is it an important aspect of leadership? And I think it's something that draws all of us together. I see in the chat that we have people calling or joining us from Denver and Nigeria and Sri Lanka and really all around the world. I'm close to you, Dwayne. I'm in Canada myself, fellow Canadian. Yay. But it's something that ties all human beings together. And I think that's really important, especially as part of our workplace. So just to start things off, if we could touch on what is the purpose of really advocating for empathy in our workplaces. You can do this broad, or if you want to focus on what it means in a leadership context. Just so why should we be making sure that we put this spotlight on empathy and make sure that it's something that we're developing within our organizations? And I will leave that open to whoever wants to start.
Oh, heck, I'll kick us off. And I think we'll probably come at this question from very different angles. And I'm glad that we're starting with this because on its surface, it might seem like a basic question, you know, what is the purpose of empathy at work? But it's a really important one. And, you know, from my perspective, I think, you know, the definition of empathy, right? It's about being able to experience the world as someone else does. And I think that if leaders can better feel and understand there's people's concerns, their frustrations, their anxieties, then they're going to be more likely motivated to help solve those issues. So I really think of empathy as a strong motivator, and I think of it like a spotlight, kind of focusing attention and resources on those who need it most.
So I'll piggyback off of it. If you think about the very definition of empathy, which is to understand and feel in a space of business, if you don't understand your clients, you're not able to be successful. So how can you best understand your clients if you're not tapped into what your employees' needs are? Because they are the driving force for success for your company. So to be able to tap in and understand what employees need at every level, to be able to connect, to be able to understand and feel is critical. And I think no matter what type of business you're in, that initial connection sets the tone for what success will look like in any facet.
Dwayne, I saw you had unmuted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. You know, and these are really, really good definitions and a good start for this conversation, because I think too, one of the things that have to happen in businesses is they need to understand that empathy is a strength. And I think empathy a lot of the times is looked at as a weakness. And the way leadership is portrayed in media, you rarely see leaders, you know, in media and in movies and whatnot, exemplify a large amount of empathy, you know, and it's something that people need to get comfortable with and understand that empathy isn't weakness. Empathy is the cornerstone to connection. So when you think about empathy, there's that emotional empathy, which is, you know, mirroring and sharing in somebody else's feelings. And those are moments that are important to understand, create safety, create that psychological safety when people know that they can trust you. But there's also cognitive empathy, which is understanding how somebody thinks and feels. And how great are you going to be as a leader or as an organization if both internally and externally you have that ability to, you know, really empathize on a cognitive level, at least, to understand what people are thinking and feeling, because that's how you're going to get the response, not just from your people inside your business, but from the markets and the people that you service outside of your business as well. So it is a strength. And I think we got to change that stigma around it so people really understand and embrace it more.
Awesome. I go last. Great insights from all of you. I do think that empathy is extremely important in the workplace, and the more that we continue to develop each leader within the workforce, this is gonna continue to be in the highlights. And the reason for it is because empathetic leaders also have the ability to remove roadblocks at another level that leaders who do not use empathy have, because a lot of times come to, I will say the first stage is accepting what, you know, an employee or a situation is happening, and also how it's being perceived from different perspectives. And empathetic leaders have that ability to not only accept the situation for what it is, right, and assess, okay, where is this in-person employee at this moment of time, what does the business or the situation requires to do, how can we collaborate together, and how can we remove roadblocks together, because it's not only the leader removing only roadblocks, it's a team effort and a collaborative effort. And I think the part why this is so important is because it helps business not only mobilize quickly, but also have a much global perspective of situations of business in general and also on people. And the other part I wanted to add, and through this to the conversation for my team here, is that when empathy is at the workplace and is present, people feel not only like empowered to do like more, but also to challenge themselves and to challenge the teams to come together for solutions. And that is something that empathy brings to the workplace, and it's important for every team to have.
That's all awesome contributions there. I really like, Dwayne, how you talked about the idea of some of the things that might hinder empathy from being acceptable in the workplace. I was recently leading some work by Christine Porras. She studies a lot about incivility in the workplace and kind of how it breeds toxicity. And one of the aspects she found that makes leaders have difficulty with things like empathy and just being kind was appearing too soft. So people worry that if they're, showing that concern and that care, that they won't be portrayed as exactly what you talked about, those tough leadership examples that we've been shown on TV, or even the companies that we look at as being the highlight of the great workplaces, is that, oh, well, I'm going to look soft, so I can't show that care and that concern for my employees. And I just think that's such an important aspect, that we start shifting that view of what empathy is, and those definitions of, cognitive empathy is the thinking, what is this person feeling? The emotional empathy is the feeling of it. And then there's empathic concern or compassion, of which is taking steps to help people based upon what we've, discovered through that. And I think that's what you're talking about, where it's so beneficial as a leader there. The first part of this session, I hope I'm not getting choppy here. My video looks a little bit weird. The first part of this session, I'd really like to focus on the benefit and the impacts of empathy at work, and then kind of slide into how can we build the leadership capabilities for empathy. So I'd just like to look at a couple of specific examples of where we can use empathy, or where empathy might be beneficial in the workplace. And the first one here is, how can empathy, and I know that one of the big issues that we get within teams and such is conflict, and people having difficulty handling situations with one another, whether those be work related or, personality related. So how can empathy help address and resolve conflicts within teams or across departments?
I can go first. I do think that empathy supports the resolution of conflict management and also conflict resolution within, because it creates an acceptance and an understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean that the conflict shouldn't happen. And again, conflict in the workplace is healthy. It needs to happen because we are all different individuals, right? We cannot think and operate the same way. If that happens, that's bad. That's group thinking. You don't want that necessarily. You want people to bring different perspectives. And the reason why it helps is because one person, and we talk a lot about perception. Perception is the reality of that individual, right? It may not be the reality, but at the time, is the reality, and it helps open the horizon to globalize that employee and to provide other perspective. This is where this employee was coming from. We understand you perceive it from this perspective, and at the same time provide it from other side. And then it gets people talking, because when we put a neutralization that is about understanding the situation, I would say that people lower their bar and then say, oh, okay, let me see. Okay, no. And then when they start talking, people can resolve conflict quickly, because now it's not me versus them. It's like We are a team. Let's come together. Let's see how can we mutually agree to disagree. And again, agreements and disagreements are going to happen in the workplace and in life. We are not going to see eye to eye all the time, but it's important to understand and to accept that other people are different than us. They're gonna perceive the world different than us and situations. And it's at the end of the day, is how can we come together to the collective goal that we have in this project, or to serve this client, or whatever it is.
I really like that, Aura, and I think to build on that platform of shared understanding, it made me think of something I was talking about the other day with some colleagues, talking about frustration, which is one of those really difficult emotions at work. And I was reminded of something called the fundamental attribution error, where essentially we kind of misread someone or a situation. So we think someone's a jerk because they cut us off in traffic, but actually they're driving their pregnant spouse to the hospital, right? So what was a situational response, we attribute to the person. And I think that we do that a lot at work, where we get frustrated and we get upset, and that causes that conflict. And we have to take that step back and remind ourselves that most of the people we work with are not deliberately being malicious. There's not that malice. And so I think with that empathy lens, we can step away from some of those heated emotions that come up with conflict and remind ourselves that let's start from, a place of shared understanding. We hopefully want the same goals for either our employees or our customers, and we can just, I think, take a deep breath and approach the situation a bit more rationally.
I would add on, I think one of the biggest pieces when you're dealing with an empathetic leader as it relates to conflict resolution is the ability to actively listen. And so oftentimes, because you're able to actively listen, you're also able to hear multiple perspectives and acknowledging the emotions of each person involved, being able to demonstrate what it is to be able to sincerely listen and understand can also help de-escalate the situation. And if you're fostering that culture of open dialogue, then even for those healthy conflicts, there's a more likelihood to reach a resolution that everyone can agree to. But it also fosters a more inclusive environment. Because if you think about it, as a leader, if I am willing to sit and listen to these different perspectives, I am setting the tone and modeling behavior that the rest of my team will follow as well.
Yeah, great points. And I think a lot of it too is you have to look at the environment, in terms of conflict resolution, is what is the environment, the culture of the organization, and is there already an established foundation of safety? And when you think about safety, you think about vulnerability. And most people refuse to be vulnerable because when we're in our heads, we feel vulnerability to us as weakness. But when we see it out of others, we assume it's strength. We view that as strength. And it's to get to that point is the difficult part, because a lot of us are stuck in our positions. We're stuck in the way we think, and there's stories we tell ourselves. So I think part of it is just, stepping back a little bit and saying, okay, instead of having an ethnocentric view on my stance and how I see the world, or how I see, the business plan kind of being executed, I need to look back and say, okay, what is this person, truly trying to achieve, right? So decenter myself. So it's not about them trying to hurt me. It's not about them trying to come after me, but it's about them sharing their views. I may not agree with it, but start with by saying, hey, that's an interesting take. Can you tell me more about why you believe that? Can you tell me more about why you feel this needs to be the direction? Because in the absence of understanding what the person is trying to do, we're filling the gaps with our emotions and the stories that we're telling ourselves. So why don't we just, instead of filling the gaps with our own stories, fill in the gaps with their stories and take away and be able to process things. You don't have to have an answer or a resolution right in the moment. Maybe you say, hey, Lindsay, I'm going to take this away. I think it's a very interesting idea, and I'm going to see how we can work with this moving forward. So it's really about showing that from a leadership perspective and exemplifying that vulnerability and that ability to really be accepting and step back and not make assumptions. And then that's going to resonate down to your team. But I will say it's very contextual, because environments are very different from departments to the businesses to companies. So who knows who's trying to vie for what position and whatnot. So those things have to come into play as well. And that's where leaders have a very, very important job to create that equity to ensure that that isn't a composite of why interactions are happening at a heightened level consistently within your team.
I really like, Dwayne, how you touched upon the idea of the vulnerability there. Do you think, as a group, are there any, I'm choppy here, I apologize. Are there any prerequisites for empathy? So when we get into looking at empathy as a skill, do you feel that there are some prerequisites with the individual or even the workplace itself that are necessary in order for us to use empathy as a tool and to be empathetic leaders within the workplace?
I don't know if that was for me specifically, but
No, it's for anybody. It's for anyone. That's a free for all one.
Yeah, you're kind of choppy there. You know, I would say there needs to be a level of acceptance from the leader. They need to be willing to, you know, not have it's if I could use an example, for instance, you could use Elon Musk as a great example, right? So here's an individual that took over this company called Twitter and literally went in there and just changed the entire dynamic, but did it from an autocratic standpoint. Didn't listen to the people that were there, didn't take advice from anybody, but just made things, you know, the way he wanted them made. And as you've seen, not only have they changed their name, but their value of the organization has gone down tremendously since he's taken over the company. Now, that's a result of his style of leadership, which wasn't accepting the different views and opinions and the ideas and others. And he went at it at an autocratic way. And we see that result. And that's why Instagram created Threads, and look at them thriving right now. So you have to understand that those are some natural consequences, both from a systemic standpoint, but also from an emotional standpoint, where people aren't going to feel safe. People aren't going to feel trusted in that. And therefore, they're not going to give, I think, their best work to you as a leader. So understanding that going into leadership is, how do I become accepting and not feel as though my ideas are the only ideas, but there are others that we can use to really help us grow, not only into deeper markets, but also to grow a culture in our organization where it just spawns more success.
And I think, to your point, Dwayne, I think one of the biggest challenges in that is if you don't have the foundational structure to speak to it. So culture shifts and changes. Leaders have a huge impact in it, but if you don't create a space where your values don't align with empathy, if you don't have a space where your actions, the way you operate, your processes don't speak to an empathetic culture, then foundationally, you're not prepared to say that we are empathetic. If you say, hey, we're operating in a space of empathy, but the policies and procedures you have in play don't reflect that. Something as simple as how you write at your parental leave. Something as detailed is how you handle sickness, and the way that you address those things speak to procedurally whether or not you're truly being empathetic. The other piece of that is taking into consideration how you act on those things. You know, operating in space of HR, we all know there's no black and white. We typically have to operate in the gray. And while there are some things that are concrete black and white, when you're dealing with people, you can't operate with how you handle people in black and white. It is definitely a gray area. And so if you're talking foundationally what empathy looks like, navigating through that gray and being very transparent with your leadership team and your company as a whole as to why you operate in that gray is critical to being a prerequisite for being an empathetic culture.
I agree with you on that culture lens. And I think some of the most, I guess, critical dimensions of culture to look at to say, hey, do we pass the test of being in a company that values empathetic leadership or a company that does it? Is I look at things like who gets promoted around here and why. I look at things like how do decision gets made. I look at things like who's rewarded. And you start to see trends, and you very clearly see trends in what type of behaviors that organization values. And that's one of the areas that I look at if I want to say, hey, Are you true on your word? Are you being authentic here when you say we're value empathetic leaders? This is a safe space, a vulnerable space. But when you look at those very concrete, I guess, measures of culture, then you'll have a different data set with which to make those assumptions about the type of workplace you're in.
I love everything that Erica, Dwayne, and Lindsay have shared. The one thing that I have to add is that it also, when we have empathy in the workplace in regard of culture, is important to follow through. And this relates to what Erica was mentioned. Like, for example, like on the sick time, when an employee is sick, how do we follow up? How do we draft that message that really touches the employee and let them know that the company is here? So, something as important as, your health comes first. I'm here, we are here, let us know how we can help. And it's not only writing it and telling that to the employees, also follow through the actions, meaning like now connecting with the team. Okay, the employee is going to be out, how can we help you, from the leadership perspective, how can we support you, and ensure that the entire structure is there. So at the end of the day, the company is fully walking the talk. It's not just words, in an email. It's actually the words in the email plus the action following through, and then also checking on the employee and checking on the team. How are you guys doing? What else can we do to support the employee? What else can we do to support you with this extra work load because this has happened? So I think there are multiple spaces and multiple steps that companies have to follow, because that's the important part. Not only saying it, but ensuring your actions as leaders, as organization, demonstrate the empathy.
That's awesome. Thanks for your contributions on there. And I apologize, I am choppy. I'm not sure why my internet hates me today. I'd like to suit towards those inclusion efforts within an organization and what steps that leaders can take to integrate empathy into DEI initiatives. So how can empathy contribute to DEI within organizations, so towards those efforts, and what can leaders do to integrate empathy into DEI initiatives? There's too many vowels all in a row. It's just not coming out well. Wants to take that one on?
It's a very interesting question, because when I think about the way that question is posed, is I think the first thing is DEI part of the fabric of your organization. So, we don't want people looking at empathy as something to say, okay, this is a DEI initiative, so I now have to enact empathy, because that brings on inauthenticness. And the formalized culture of your organization, is detailed through responsibilities, your core values, your mission statement, things like that. The informal part of your culture is those conversations that happen, how people are being made to feel, what leaders are doing and saying. So if you empathize in one area, do you empathize in all areas? People look for that level of consistency. So as a leader, look at your empathetic skill set as something that you attribute all the time. You attribute walking in the hallway, you attribute on a Teams call, you attribute on a one-on-one or in a team meeting. It's something that's a part of your DNA, because with associates or employees are seeing how it's being applied to some things versus others, then that will bring on a lack of safety for a lot of individuals, because they want to know their leaders are consistent. And that's one of the ground rules for being a leader, is you got to be consistent no matter who you are. If you're a bad leader, be consistently bad. If you're a good leader, be consistently good. But people just want to know what to expect. So I think it's so important that when you look at empathy, it's to say, am I an empathetic person, period, in my life, how I present myself in all situations? But then how do I use this empathy in these certain situations, right? It's like golf clubs. You're not going to use a putter to draw to tee off on a par 5. So it's like, what are you going to use based on the situation? But understanding that empathy should be a part of what you're doing in every situation.
I was paying attention to the chat, and one of the comments about some of the policies that are being adjusted, whether it's based upon menopause, whether it's based upon situations where there's a miscarriage and where those policies come into play. So when you think about DEI and you intersect it with empathy, one of the things you have to take note of is recognizing the diversity of experiences that your team may have. Whether it's age, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's life experiences, to take the opportunity to connect with employees is the only way you're going to understand how to take DEI to the next level. And so one of the things that I'm very proud of is we take the time to have what we call culture chats, and it's just one-on-ones with our employees. So how do I ensure that whether you're with me for a day or 2 years, you're an ambassador for the company you work for? Well, I ask, what makes you proud to be here? And I also ask you, what makes you shy away from saying, hey, this is where I work? And how do we change it? But not only do you ask that question, you talk about, well, what can we do to put it in play? Because it's really easy for me to tell you what's wrong. It's very hard to have a hard conversation about, well, all these are great things to put in play, but financially, do they make sense? Do they make sense from an inclusion standpoint? Because oftentimes when we're trying to include one group, we find ourselves excluding another. So to be very intentional in recognizing from a empathy standpoint, to state, you know what, while I appreciate this piece, have you thought about the impact it has to this set of individuals? Because if you're truly focused on being an empathetic leader, you're going to acknowledge that and you're going to have that conversation. The third piece is, to Dwayne's point, to be consistent in putting it in play. So oftentimes, and you guys have probably seen this across the board, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, there's this influx of progress and programs and processes because we want to improve diversity, equity, inclusion. Oh, yes, we want to make sure everyone feels like they're belonging. We want to make sure everyone has access. And then funding disappears and all of those programs disappear because it was not deeply embedded in the culture of the organization. It was just a checklist item. And so to talk about what it means to be intentional in your focus on diversity, what it means to be intentional on how you ensure your policies and processes are equitable and fair. And not only are they inclusive, but to make sure that you wrote this policy, you wrote this program, you created this system for me as an individual, but I don't feel like I belong as a part of it. If you're not asking those questions on the back end, then you're missing out on making sure those two pieces directly intersect and correlate with each other.
Erica, you've made a lot of good points today, but one that really stood out to me there was the unintentional knock-on effects sometimes. So when you go out of your way, to your point, to create, an environment that is inclusive for one group, you can unintentionally exclude others. And so I think just reinforcing that point of what are that next step, that next third, fourth, fifth level group, and those knock-on effects, and what is that actually going to ripple through the organization? I think we're so quick to add when we're looking at trying to make change that we sometimes forget to take a step back and say, well, what actually can we take away that's not helping? And I think the other point about funding, my goodness, I see it so much in clients where they say, this is an important initiative, and then someone's doing it off of the side of their desk with no metrics in place, because people also say, and I know we're getting a little bit down into the DE&I land instead of focusing on empathy, but people say, oh, it can't be measured, and that's just not true. So I just think it's so important to really, I guess, invest as organizations, to invest in your DE&I initiatives and to invest in your leadership coaching and training, which is where a lot of this empathy comes to. I see it so high on the L&D agenda of a lot of organizations, is how are we training up our leaders? And I think that's a smart place to focus. And I'd love to know your perspectives about what's going on in your own organizations.
Excellent points from all of you. I do think that empathy plays a role not only in the D&I, but also on everything that happens on the organization. And this is part of the strategic plan, because again, D&I is not like a program only, it needs to be tied to the strategy of the organization to ensure that not only has buy-in from all levels of the organization, but also that gets the support from the top of the organization. So it's not something that is the flavor of the month. I do agree with all of you because you mentioned the consistency part, and also like why being consistent is important, because the point that both Erica and Lindsay made here, that if we are not consistent with what we are doing in one area, we may exclude another area or group of DNI that we don't want to do because that obviously defeats the purpose. But having consistency and ensuring that we are understanding, accepting situations, and being empathetic about them, and also providing feedback and follow up is key to not only DNI but everything that happens within the organization.
So we are amazingly halfway through already. We're past halfway through now of this conversation, which is wild. I'd like to just switch gears a little bit here and touch on the leadership side. So Lindsay, what you were talking about bringing empathy into our leadership development programs, and how can we go about incorporating that into an organization's leadership style. So how we train leaders, how we develop them within our organization, whether that's done one-on-one or within leadership programs or mentoring. So why don't we switch over to that and talk a little bit about how do we make sure that leaders are equipped with empathy skills. I'm reading a book called The War on Kindness by Jamel Zaki, I believe is his last name. Excellent book. And it talks about how empathy is about 30% genetic in our capabilities, but the rest is skills that we can build. So how do we make sure that our leaders are equipped with these skills within our organizations? Anybody at all can take that.
So I'll jump in. There are a couple of things you can do. So coaching sounds so very basic and so very simple, but I will tell you, as a person who operates as a career coach and executive coach, one of the conversations that I find is, while it may be innate in people, they may not know how to do it. So to model those behaviors and walk through scenarios and talk leaders through experiences will definitely help to build that skill set. The other piece, and it's so simple, we operate in a very remote first environment, but sometimes our meetings are face to face, sometimes they're in person, sometimes there's a mixture. And we'll often practice the behavior with each other because there's a fear of, I don't know how to do this. I want to do it and I want to do it well. So let's work out the scenario. Let's practice through it. Let's have an opportunity where you have to navigate through difficult conversations. You have to recognize where being an empathetic leader comes into play. The other piece is assessing where you are. So, there are tons of behavioral assessments and personality assessments out there, but to take your leadership team through those assessments first, and then to sit down and say, now we know who we are and how we operate. How do we leverage it from a communication standpoint? How do we leverage it from taking on who should lead certain programs so that we can build a relationship with our team would be critical. And the third thing is celebrating and rewarding when those behaviors exist. What often gets repeated, gets rewarded, gets repeated. So if you acknowledge that leadership in a personal and in a very public environment, you're not only fostering a space where the team sees that empathy is celebrated and rewarded, but the individuals see it and appreciate it. They tend to repeat that behavior in different environments.
I will add, great point, Erica. I will add experimentation is key. The more that we interact with people that are different than us, right, in the workplace, the more global that we can become, and the more understanding and comprehension that we will have, not only of the business at hand, of the team we're working on, but also of the global environment of the world, because their experiences are totally different than ours. And obviously, for example, like I have been here 39 years, right? My experience are totally different than Erica, that Win, and than Lindsay, but they walking me through their lens of how they experience the world, and also you, Renee, how you experience the world, or what is your perspective and why you have that point of view about a situation or about anything, help me understand, okay, and me, I can provide feedback of how I perceive it or why I have the views I have, right? And we enrich each other. So I think that experimentation and connecting and having able to not only share but also collaborate through learning is important, super important on this arena. And to the point that Erica was making, which I thought that she said it perfectly, it was beautiful how she put it in context. Such a complex idea is that part of the role modeling, and also that the role play is key, because it can help people practice, especially if that doesn't come necessarily naturally to them, but also how can they navigate and think of other scenarios that they may have not think about it at that specific time. So I see those as a connection, experimentation plus role modeling. Thank you.
And I think what's been really positive with kind of this advent of remote work is that we're in these increasingly global organizations, and we're going to have a lot of not culture clashes, but some cultural misunderstandings. So I almost think with empathy training, it's going to become more and more prevalent, because we're going to be naturally stumbling into situations where maybe we step in it a little bit, because we're coming at something from two really different contextual starting points. And I'll give you a really silly example of this. So I'm American, but I live and work in London, and we have just different names for different meal times. So we didn't understand when we were asking each other to get food what it was we meant. And so we ended up plotting it out on the wall, and all the different times of day that you might normally eat, what it's called, if it's different in the north and the south. And it was really silly, but it gave us a chance to do really all the things Erica said. It meant we kind of had our baseline assessment of what we thought we understood. We had a conversation about the differences, and then we came to a shared understanding. So I do think that we're going to naturally become more empathetic as a workforce, because we're going to be forced to, just in the nature of working in global organizations. And I think that's a really positive and exciting shift.
I love what everybody's saying. And, to add on the brilliance of what has already been said, I think, too, there's a component of reality that we have to acknowledge. Leaders are in their position for a reason. They got there, and they have personally felt that their success has been attributed to whatever methodology or style they had. So now at this point, when they're at this point, this highest level of success of, in some cases, ego, how do you get them to invest into this? Why is it important? I'm already successful. I'm a CEO. I'm a president. I'm a chief. Like, why do I need to do this? Because I'm looking good. I'm getting my bonuses. Our company's growing, etc. So it's about, and I always say it has to start from the top down. It absolutely has to be from the top down. And the models and the behaviors, and I think too, what Lindsay's saying is that, we're moving into a more diverse, workforce. We're moving into more diverse markets, et cetera. And globalization, as it's expanded over the last several years, decades, has drawn more of an importance for people to, diversify their ability to connect with different audiences. And especially the war for talent is so big, because, a corner store, in the 50s was able to rely on the consumers that were in that area, right? Well, guess what? Now people could buy things from all over the world. So I don't have to walk to that corner store if I don't want to. I could get something online. So what's going to attract that person to purchase something online? Well, if leaders aren't thinking about that, and thinking about, okay, how do we connect with people? How do we connect with people inside of our business and outside? Then you're not going to embrace empathy, because empathy has to be something that, as a leader, as the top person in the organization, that this has to be exemplified all the way down, right? And regardless of your success, regardless of what got you to this point. And I liken it to working out, for instance. It's like, you work out for 6 months and you get a result. You feel good about it. You're like, yes, I hit my result. But you still do the same workouts over and over and over. And then all of a sudden your results stop. You're not getting any better. And you wonder why you're not getting better is because you haven't changed your workouts and you've plateaued. So these leaders need to understand that they're plateauing. Regardless of the level of success they achieved, it's not going to go any higher. So therefore, you have to change your workouts, i.e. you have to adapt and evolve your leadership style. And empathy, if it's something that hasn't been a part of your leadership, make it a part of your leadership now from an authentic way, because that's going to help you be even more successful moving forward. So it's getting leaders to understand what's in it for them.
And I wonder, Dwayne, if a leader has to fail in some way to then take that next step on that growth journey. I'd be curious what people's opinions are on that front.
So it's funny you mentioned that, Lindsay. The first thing that came to my mind, so there's a book that I love and I share with all of my leaders. It's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I worked retail before I got into digital and marketing space. And I had a store manager who was a phenomenal manager, turned the numbers like no one's business, was doing a great job. So of course, no one bothered her. But her employee engagement scores were horrible. And when I say horrible, I mean horrible. But if you talk to her team, they loved working there. But when it was time to fill out that survey, you got a different number. And I had a conversation with our vice president of operations and our president. And I said, well, if you keep acknowledging her success in her numbers and not acknowledging the impact it's having on her team, you're not getting the best out of her or her team. And so we sat down and we talked to the team, and I asked the question. I said, so you guys do well operationally. You tell me things are going well here, but your survey numbers are saying something totally different. I just want to understand why. And they're like, well, everything is fine. Found out they didn't want to lose her as a leader because they knew what to expect. To your point, Dwayne, she was consistent. They were getting their bonuses. She was getting her bonus, but she was consistent, and they didn't know what they were going to get outside of that. They did not get those visits from executive offices because they were consistent and their store looked well. So they were like, well, if we change this, it may change the dynamics in other space. So we'd rather be miserable and know that we're going to get our bonus, that we're not going to have extra visits. We're not going to have to do anything outside of what we've been doing. And I said, well, think about this. If we're able to improve the culture that you work in, you're going to make more money. You're going to have higher customer satisfaction. You're going to have employees that are engaged and excited. And sat down with her and we had a long conversation. And she was genuinely distraught because she thought her team loved her. She genuinely thought, so when I shared the feedback of your team is operating more out of fear than they are out of love and compassion and understanding of you are operating as a team. And she said, well, I want to fix it. So we sat and we walked through, and it took us about 2.5, 3 months of one-on-one conversations, changing some policies, changing how she interacted and communicated. And her numbers actually increased 20 to 30% over the previous year. The employee engagement scores began to shoot through the roof. But the leadership above her had to recognize that while she was doing things well, it got her to that point. She had plateaued, and she had an opportunity to do things even better if they were willing to acknowledge that tiny corner that no one saw as significant because the dollar signs were there. And so I think as a leader, whether you're the VP of operations or the chief human resource officer, you have to realize just because my corner of the world is working well does not mean that everything is doing what it should do completely and consistently.
I just want to say that's a really good example. And it just shows you that the desire to change has to be greater than staying the same. So what is that? Are you running towards pleasure or are you running away from pain? And leaders need to make that decision. But that was a fantastic example.
Agree 100%. That was awesome.
Like what you said, Erica, the devil when it comes to wanting change, right? Like we like the familiar. And if we're comfortable, even when it comes to learning new skills, right? We're familiar with doing things a certain way. And all of a sudden you're like, especially when it comes to empathy, I need you to get a little bit more vulnerable. I need you to ask your employees to maybe get a little bit more vulnerable as well. That can be hard. And one of the aspects of empathy is we know that it requires emotional labor. from people. It's not just, like when we go into work and we have that mental labor we're asking people to do emotional labor. Is there ways that organizations can support their leaders to actually take on this extra task so that they feel more supported and comfortable taking on that emotional labor, so that they don't, that can become an indicator of burnout when we're asking people to continually do more, especially that emotional side of things. Is there ways that organizations can help leaders not only to be equipped with, active listening skills and how to have one-on-ones with their employees, but also ensure that they're supported so that we're not just saying, hey, one more thing on the top of the pile here?
I can go. That's a great question, and it's actually complex question because each organization is different and each leader is different. I will say, I will share this. One of the things that one of the greatest leaders that I have worked with taught me very early on is that change is hard. And I love how he went about it. And the reason why I love it is because he was empathetic, but he was not empathetic in a way that many people actually describe it, which sometimes is like the pity part of empathetic, or just saying, no, everything, we good, when everything is actually not good. We have to do a major implementation in the workplace. And it was like lots of work, lots of changes. And he went around and he sat with everybody in the project and he said, change is hard. This is going to be hard. We can do it. I trust your skills. I trust your ability. I'm here for anything that is needed. And I know I have picked up the greatest team to do this work. And I remember thinking at that time, I'm like, has he gone out of his mind? He's telling people this is going to be hard. This is going to be even harder, right? But what he was trying to actually do was create that level feel of acceptance. Accept is going to be hard. Then let's go and move on. Let's do it together. Let's do what you do best and show what you can do as, as a member of a team, and also what your skill is. And I think that this apply to the point that you're making, Renee, of empathy in the workplace. Sometimes it's not easy because sometimes the feedback we receive is uncomfortable in the sense because we haven't seen it from that lens. We don't have the same perception that the person have about a situation. But it's like, okay, let me listen. And this go back to the point I believe Erica was making in the second question you asked, that it was about, she mentioned something about actively listen help you become more empathetic, because then you can create solutions for teams, right? And it's about that. And it's like, this may be hard to listen to it because you don't comprehend it now. But if you listen and truly listen, you can then accept the situation for what it is. And then you can go ahead and walk and move. So my thing will be, change is hard and we are all in this journey together. And we will continue to grow, and having the support of people and the organization is key. Thank you.
I would add in terms of the change too, and Aura said it so great, that change is hard. The ability for organizations to adapt to this in a way that will make it easier for a lot of leaders to digest is to apply it to your already set standards and values and policies as an organization. I think if you add this, as you mentioned, Renee, as this, like, here's another thing we're doing, then that's how it's going to be perceived. But how do you bake it into the already set dynamics of the organization? That's the best way. Look at the policies, look at the processes, look at the evaluations, look at the one-on-one coaching, templates, etc. Those are sort of things that you could look at to say, okay, how do we infuse empathy in this? How do we already take what leaders are doing and apply empathy to it? And then how do we exemplify that from the top down? Because people learn not just from reading, but they learn from doing. So how do you get them in the habit of doing something? That visual aspect is so important. And keep in mind that emotional labor, it's a real thing. It's like the old composite of like the example of the rider and the elephant, right? The rider is the logical person, the elephant is the emotion. So if that emotion wants to go in a different direction, the rider is going to have a hard time controlling that elephant, right? So it's a matter of saying, how do we get them both on the same page? Well, it's the why, what's in it for them, but it's also logically, how do we apply this in a way that isn't an addition to what leaders are already taking on right now? Or more so, how is this just a different way for leaders to do what they're already doing? And I think the better we do at that, bringing in examples in training, bringing in processes in training that are already being used within the company, that's going to help leaders, I think, understand their ability to connect with this a lot more naturally, and lower and start to limit or at least reduce that the emotional capacity that it takes to learn these things in the workplace.
I think the beauty of emotional labor, to your point, Dwayne, is it's always been here. It's more prevalent in healthcare and teaching and hospitality in areas of customer service. And so when you're trying to put it in a space that's not traditionally acknowledged it, flip the vision of it and say, think about how you've experienced things as a customer in a hospital or in a retail environment or as a student. And the clients we serve are looking for the same thing. You may not be used to it in this particular industry, but the understanding of emotional labor is the ability to connect and be consistent. The other piece that you've got to recognize, and emotional labor is hard, but it could be positive and it could be negative. So contingent on how you approach it, it could lead to better customer and employee experiences. But it also can be taxing. And so recognizing it being another thing to someone as opposed to it being baked into the system allows you to recognize the importance of making it as very easy to understand what's important to you. And I always ask the question, what's in it for me? So for me to be committed to being empathetic, for me to recognize the importance of an emotional labor, whether it's to my peers or to the clients I serve, what's in it for me? And if you're able to connect those dots, then it doesn't become an extra thing. It becomes a thing that makes your life easy. It becomes a thing that makes your work easier. And it also allows you to operate in a culture that you're able to be your best self.
Awesome. We're closing in on the end here. We got 4 minutes left. I've got 2 questions, so I'm going to try to squeeze both of them in. We know that change is a constant thing in our organizations, and it's something that is always going to be a constant thing in our organizations. How can organizations ensure that empathy remains a central focus as they grow and face new challenges? So how can we make sure that empathy isn't something that falls off as new things come about and how we have different changes and challenges that we face? How can we ensure that empathy remains a central focus within organizations?
I think Dwayne has answered that for us in terms of when you mentioned embedding it into the things that already exist. So the values that we have as an organization that already exist, our employee value proposition that already exists, training programs that are already in existence. I think to everyone's point, it's not adding on more, it's baking it in seamlessly to what already exists, because you're right, businesses change constantly, strategies change, the goalposts change, people get tired, but this isn't a training initiative that's one and done. It gets baked into the fabric of the organization.
And I was going to say, add the why to that as well. Be very clear on the why. And to Erica's point, change is hard. Emotional labor is going to be around regardless. I think we've all uncovered things that were hard for us in the beginning, and now we don't even think about it. Think about the first time you've driven a car, right? For those who drive, it was like you're on high alert trying to navigate this big machine that you were driving. Now there's days I drive to work and I don't even think about how I got there, mechanically driving that vehicle. So it's like change is always going to be hard in the beginning. And I think be honest and upfront with that, but know the more you do it, the more you commit to it and stick with that why, it'll become easier.
And if you're sticking to the why, and if you're embedding it and baking everything you do, call it what it is. I think oftentimes we forget to name it. And so people don't realize what it is. Call it what it is. This is empathetic leadership. This is a policy filled with empathy. And when people continuously hear it, they're more likely to understand that it is baked into their culture and it's not a new thing, but it's also being consistent in the things you do as well.
Love it. I echo everything they say. It's awesome. Great job, everybody.
Yeah, no, I love all of this. Such great insights, such great advice. We've got 1 minute left here. So what I'd like to focus on is maybe just something simple that leaders can do in order to be more empathetic. So if there was one aspect of empathy or one skill or one piece of advice that you'd like to give to leaders to build their empathy skills or be more empathetic in their work, what would that be?
Well, mine is three-pronged, but it is still one. Listen actively, learn from your mistakes, and then act on them, not just in policy, but in action consistently.
I'd say start small. It's intentional. So think of one thing that you could do in a day, in a week that you'll commit to, whether it's just asking one question throughout that week with everybody you come across, just to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, but just one small thing.
And I'd say practice, right? You've got your small thing identified, you've got your goals, practice.
Mine is two. One is pause. You will become more empathetic when you pause. And two, acceptance. Acceptance is key to move forward with anything, and that includes empathy.
Love it. I think that if people just started doing each one of those things and building them into their day, that we're going to have much more empathetic leaders and much more empathetic companies. I'd really like to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for participating and putting your own insights in there. I hope that this is a topic that continues to be one that is at the top of every organization, and that they're, like we said, baking it into everything that they're doing. And we're seeing it in leadership programs, and we're seeing it as something that is measured and recognized. And we're making sure that we're promoting leaders based upon being empathetic within our organizations. Because I think not only will we have happier people, but we're going to have better businesses as well. So again, thank you everybody for joining me. Thank you, Lindsay, Ora, Erica, and Dwayne. It's always lovely to be part of one of these. Next time, I hope I'm not nearly so choppy so that you have to listen very closely to my questions. But again, thank you. Thank you everybody in the chat, and hope to see you all soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.